Hello and welcome to episode 53 of this Sales Syndicate Podcast. If you haven't checked out episode 52, our 1 year anniversary with Arthur Castillo at Chili Piper, be sure to go back and check that out. Released last week, I think off the top of my head, that will be something like October 26th-ish. But anyway, we're going to be doing another startup story today. We haven't done one for a while since speaking to Jay Desai at Summarize. But slightly different. We're going more down the marketing route, let's say. So I'll hand over to my guest, Neil, to introduce himself before we dive right in. So over to you, Neil.
Hi, thanks for having me. So, quick introduction to myself. My name's Neil. I'm founder and CEO here at Lunio. To give you an idea of what Lunio is, what we do, so we're an invalid traffic prevention platform. We're designed for what we define as walled garden advertising environments. So any advertising environment where ad buying and ad serving happens within the same platform. So think Google Ads, LinkedIn Ads, TikTok, Pinterest, these kinds of platforms. We essentially help marketers reduce waste and inefficiencies in ad spend, make sure they're driving genuine leads, make sure their sales team aren't being inundated with bot leads that they have to follow up on, and ultimately make sure the spend is going to the right place and to real, genuine human activity. We've been around for about 7 years now, but only really started to rapidly grow and accelerate in the past sort of 2.5 years. My background before there, worked agency side for a while, and then worked in-house at one of the UK's largest online retailers, managing a couple of tens of millions of paid media budgets a month. So very well versed in the space, and yeah, essentially founded a business off the back of some problems that we saw agency side that I'm sure we'll get into.
Yeah, as I said at the start, this is the second startup story sort of topic or discussion sort of style that we're doing. So we'll go pretty in depth on the company. It's kind of a little bit self-indulgent for myself as well, because I'm extremely nosy or curious, as I like to call it. It's a slightly better word. I like to know the inner workings, the who, what, when, where, why of things. And I think it's just going to be a really interesting episode for those that have always been tempted or lured to the side of setting up their own business potentially. But we've off the back of the kickoff call, we broke it into, I think, 5 key parts, which was kind of aligned with each stage in terms of like seed funding, etc. So I guess one of the most strenuous, nitty gritty, roll your sleeves up part of that was founding and building the MVP. So do you want to just take us through what year that was, what happened, and everything in between of that founding to building the MVP?
Yeah, it's the toughest bit. It's the most sleepless nights bit, and it's the bit that you get the least reward for, and probably most likely to fail in as well. So it's also the most fun, but yeah, kind of goes hand in hand. So we founded in 2016. We had about 2 and a bit years before we actually really commercialized anything. So spent that time building the MVP. It was okay. If we compare it to what we have now, it was maybe slightly embarrassing, but you need to launch something, right? That's the whole point, like get something out the door and start generating some revenue. So we did that for 2.5 years. We were fully bootstrapped for that. So we had a couple of agency clients. Like I said, I worked agency side previously. So we built that and rolled it out to a couple of our agency clients, and we used that small amount of funding to sort of make it self-sustaining and kind of grow the product that way before we raised any outside capital like angel capital, venture capital, anything like that. So that was slow going, a lot of iterating, reiterating, and then thinking you finally got something and then realizing you actually haven't got anything decent at all. You have to go redo it all again. So yeah, a lot of work, a lot of lessons learned, definitely. Very much around like just get something out the door, right? I think we spent far too long thinking this is a great idea and really going into detail, scoping it out, and then scrapping it and doing it again, and scrapping it and doing it again. Actually, if we just built something earlier on, then we probably would have been much more successful there. So we rolled that product out to our agency clients for those first kind of 2.5 years before we took any external clients or any external funding from that. Worked from an office that's probably like you'd see when you look at these stereotypical startup movies or videos. Like there was literally bars on the wall, the wallpaper was peeling off because it was damp. It cost about 50 quid a month, all inclusive. Like grim is probably the best way to describe it, but it was cheap. So that's
have you read Shoe Dog the memoir by Phil Knight. So it's like
I've not actually, no.
So there's a part of the or chapter in that book that talks about the office that they started in, and there was a small hole in one of the panes of glass in the window, so it was freezing cold in the winter. It just reminds me of that. And I think you told me about it on the kickoff call, and I think it's like one of the most interesting parts of me is people tend to look at, say, the company now in your brand new offices, which we moved into fairly recently, but they fail to see or fail to understand that you will have started in a £50 a month, £50 a month office.
Yeah, it's very different. I mean, we've got a few people here. Like, we're very lucky that our staff retention is incredibly high. Like, we put a lot of emphasis on basically doing good by our people. And I think it shows in the fact that we have really high staff retention. So we have some from those early days that are still with us, and who've sort of scaled like really well with the business as well. So yeah, they can sort of, I guess, testament to that they was as grim as we say it probably was. But it is kind of at the same time all part of the fun. Like, it's not the nicest office to go to, but like I say, it's cheap. You're focused on building something. It's very scrappy. It's kind of high impact. Like, you're always doing something. You're always trying to get something out the door. You're always talking to new clients and so on. Yeah, it's very much a lifestyle. Like, you can't do anything else in your life except build this product and think about this product and think about how you're going to sell it and how you could market it. And you become bane of your partner's and family's life because it's all you can talk about and it's all you can think about. And then, like you mentioned there, we're in a new office now. We moved in 4 months ago, something like that, right in Manchester city centre, 5,000 square feet, like complete world of difference. Couldn't be more different than what we had previously. And yeah, it's strange to look back that it was only a few years ago, really, that we were in this completely different environment. And yeah, I guess testament to the team for doing a great job in putting all that together and getting us to where we are.
How many of you were there back then when you were in that bit during that first 2 years of build? How many of you were there?
So we were 4 co-founders. And then 2 from the agency that we kind of pulled in part-time to sort of help on things. But they're actually paid and funded entirely through the agency that we had, so they weren't actually like on payroll or anything like that. So yeah, 4 co-founders doing kind of part-time. Well, I mean, it's full-time, but it was like 2 full-time jobs because it was running and scaling the agency and running and scaling this. And then, yeah, 2 part-time from the agency, helping out with it. And it was really around that kind of 2-year mark, I would say, where we thought, actually, we're onto something here, that we can scale this, because agencies are like, every agency says they're unique. So if you go on Google and you type in like digital marketing agency plus unique, you'll get like 35 million results, right? So every single agency says that they're unique, and the reality is none of them actually have really anything unique to offer. They're all doing the same thing. Very crowded market, very hard to scale. You scale based on headcount and the actual like amount of hours that you can put into something, whereas something like SaaS is so much more infinitely sort of scalable in that sense. It's all based on obviously the software that you build. So it was about that 2-year mark that we kind of realized, how much more scalable this was to build a software product rather than scale an agency. And the dreams of having this huge 500-person agency acquired by one of the big 4 sort of media groups and such kind of went off to the side, and we really focused on scaling this software product. And that's when we then started having conversations around, like, do we raise external funding? Should we keep bootstrapping? What does our actual ideal client look like? Who should we be selling to? Like, all those kind of conversations started to come up at that point, once we sort of went all in and full time on that, which was definitely a big decision. I mean, we made good money agency side. We made no money from this to start, and I mean, like, my paycheck was nothing for like 4 years. It's just part of the game. It's how it is. In a fortunate enough position to have some money behind you from a previous business to be able to do that. But yeah, that's probably the single most impactful thing we've done, was to make that decision of we're going to go full time on this. But it's also the single hardest thing, because you're just completely stepping into the unknown, and it could fail. It usually does fail for most people. And we got, I guess, somewhat lucky that it happened to work out in the end.
And you were talking about building things, starting again. I've got this image of James Dyson when he, 1,500 different iterations of it before he found the one that worked. But like, how many times did you do that in that 2-year period?
Oh, good question. Probably 8 or 9, something like that. in terms of like actual front ends of the product, back ends on how the actual detection works and everything. How basic do we go to start? How complex do we go? How do we scale it? All those kind of things are constantly changing. And I think, like I mentioned, the biggest mistake that we made there was not just saying this is what we think is right, go to market with it and just test with all the customers that are interested. Instead, it was trying to get perfection on our side of what we thought was perfection rather than testing with customers. And that's kind of what holds us back. I think we could have probably done that in 6 months rather than 2.5 years if we'd had a bit more experience and knowledge perhaps in that.
I know we were speaking about it on a couple of episodes ago, but it's like I'm terrible for letting perfection get in the way of execution in all different aspects. Whether that's visually, does something look as nice as it could, or is it as polished as it could be? But I think the single most important thing with any product or service is, does it solve a problem for the customer? And the best way to understand that is the customer using it, feeding back, telling you how to improve it, and going on that journey with them. So once you got to the point of a MVP that you were happy with, let's say, I think the next stage was like from that MVP to pre-seed was about a year, I think you said. So what did that look like?
Yeah, so it's pre-seed, we call it now. When we initially raised that money, we actually called it seed and then changed it, but I'll touch on why in a bit. But round names kind of mean nothing anyway in the grand scheme of things. So we basically decided to go all in on building this business. Like, we think that this is infinitely more scalable than what we have with solving a real problem. We had customers coming to us that specifically wanted to use this product and not the agency services that we had. So we knew that there was something there that was generating some sort of demand. So took that leap and then started doing more of that kind of customer like feedback iterations, actually just launching things for customers, seeing what they think of it, does it solve the problem they want, rather than trying to be too much of a perfectionist on our side. So we were still bootstrapped then. We had lifestyle business revenues, I would say. Like, it was nice. We had some sort of money coming into business. We didn't have any income or salary as founders, because you don't want to be taking money out of the business in a growth stage. Like, you want to be just making sure you're using sort of every penny that you can to grow. I still remember actually when we closed our first ever annual deal with our first salesperson, who's still here, and it was $2,000 a year. And we must have put about 30 hours into it. I mean, the hourly rate was just dreadful. Like, you would never, ever do that now. And we were literally partying in the office because you could make payroll for that month. Like, it was that kind of level. But then at some point we decided, we had a conversation around, do we take external money and really try and scale this and kind of go big or fail fast? But it's not just going to be kind of middle of the road. Or do we go fully bootstrapped and just reinvest the profits back in and kind of grow organically that way, and get the business acquired at a nice 10-20 million valuation, and everyone's kind of very happy on it? And there's nothing wrong with that. It's actually probably harder, to be honest, to do it that bootstrap way, and have a huge amount of respect for people who do go and do that. We decided actually we did want to go down that raising external money route because we were solving a really big problem that the market was only becoming more and more aware of as time went on. Like, the market opportunity was huge for us. So we set out to raise SCIS money. So I don't know if you know about EIS and SCIS. It's kind of a tax efficiency way of investing for an early stage startup. So you get huge tax rates basically if you put money into them. And there's a time limit on when you can do that. So it's X number of years from first revenue, and after that you lose your allowance and you can't raise it anymore. So you become a lot less attractive to VC funds. So we were about to hit that limit. So we went out and said, you know what, we're going to raise 150,000, which was the limit at the time. And we turned that around in 8 days or something like that. It was probably the easiest money I could have hoped to raise. But at that stage, it's not really on the fundamentals of a business. It's all on the idea, the opportunity, the team. Are you the people to solve this problem? Are you the people to build a big business? And 90% plus of those investments fail completely and end up with nothing as a result. 10% of them work out and the fund makes a decent return. So we raised that money end of 2019, I believe it was, from SFC Capital, who very investor. If anyone's thinking on raising money, definitely recommend them. Super active as well across lots of different industries. And we used that to pay ourselves a salary as founders for the first time, which was nice, and to actually hire 2 salespeople into the business, which were paid predominantly on a commission basis because we just didn't have a huge amount of cash pay them a base and a big commission. And that was the start of like, okay, now we have bosses as founders. We don't just work for ourselves, we work for our investors. We're kind of held a bit accountable there. And much more kind of lofty goals in that sense. And we never wanted to get on this, like we call it a VC treadmill. So we didn't want to raise money and then 6 months later have to raise more money and then 6 months later have to raise more money at a higher and higher valuation every time. So we still always had this mindset of like, make sure we keep our burn rate as steady as possible. You have to burn to grow. That's just a reality. But at the same time, we always want to have be in control of our own destiny in that sense. So we've always gone and raised money in future rounds when we're like break even or slightly profitable as a business, and then we can go and decide right now is the time for us to actually go and raise some money on terms that suit us, rather than being in a situation where someone says, here's some money on some terrible terms, you have to take it because the business is going to go broke if you don't. Like, that's not the situation that you want to be in.
And what did the what happened to the product in that sort of year time frame then, in terms of the progression?
Not a huge amount, to be fair. Like, compared to the early stage where things are just changing constantly, it was very much okay, we think we've got product market fit here, or at least early stages of product market fit here. So let's really double down on getting some sort of early stage sales motion, like inbound and outbound, which takes up all the time and resources that we had. So it was more like use the 2.5 years to get the product to a place where we're happy enough with it for the next 12 months, then use 12 months to really start getting some revenue in, building sales and marketing and so on. And then product evolution kind of really kicks off from there. So when I say we had an engineering team, so our engineering team at pre-seed was one person, which was my co-founder, and that was it. Like, there was nobody else. So even if you go and raise 150 grand, like 150 grand might get you a good engineer for a year and a bit of salary, and that's it. And you're not going to blow the entire amount on just one engineer. So it was more like a steady state of, we're happy with where things are at. Let's get some money through the door. Let's grow some revenues. Then let's go and see what we can do at future funding rounds.
And what just ballpark, what was your sort of ARR at that point?
When we raised the pre-seed?
Yeah. So I guess end of the third year ish.
Very, very small. I mean, it was like 100k maybe, like less than what an average customer would kind of be to us now, but it was like the entire year's revenue.
And then part 3 was once you got that pre-seed then, which you said was about 150k, which you took a bit of salary from and hired someone as well. So that pre-seed to seed was circa 2 years. I've got jotted down here. So that's a fairly big window. So what journey, progression, advancements happened in those 2 years then?
Yeah, so that was an interesting time, because I think that's the part where the point where you start kind of saying, okay, we actually have a business here. Like, people are actually interested in what we're buying. The market's getting educated in what we're doing. You have people that want to start working for you, or they've heard about you. Or, it starts to feel like you're actually getting some traction at that point. So we actually started building out a dev team. So rather than just having one person who was building the product, we had 4 by the end of that were actually working on building the product. And you've started to increase those revenues, not hugely significantly, because a pre-seed round is not a huge amount of money. Like I say, it's still a small ticket in the grand scheme of things. So started to just build out the product more, but within what we were doing, like we've always been very conscious, but especially then we're very conscious of going very deep into what we're very good at, rather than trying to go broad across many different things. So we didn't want one product that solves 10 problems, or a suite of 10 different products when you're only doing 100k a year in revenue. Like, it's completely pointless. Instead, saying actually we're really, really good at stopping. At the time, it was click fraud specifically, which is like a subset of invalid traffic that we work with now. So we're really good at stopping click fraud on Google specifically. Let's go all in on that and just be the go-to for that, like the best platform out there for solving this specific problem. We always had ambitions to expand that to various other channels like we have now, to expand it beyond just click fraud into other types of invalid traffic, but we didn't want to spread ourselves too thin, because then we just wouldn't actually achieve anything. Like, we just had to be laser focused on the specific subset that we were going after, and that worked really, really well. Like, we started to get some good traction in that market, like the click fraud market specifically. It's not a big market. Like, you probably cap out at a couple of $1 million a year in revenue, something like that. Like, you're not really going to be able to take it beyond that. But that was fine for then, and then the expansion can come a little bit later in that. And then when we started getting, like I say, really decent traction in that, that's when we started exploring seed rounds, which at the time so I mentioned before, when we raised the pre-seed, we called it a seed, and then later on we're like, actually it's a pre-seed, because, well, I guess it looks better on marketing when you raise a bigger seed round than when you raise a smaller seed round. But it's one of those things, like, round names really mean nothing. Like, our seed round was just over £2 million, and for us it was more of a genuine seed round because it was like, we've got actually some fit, some revenue, we know what we're doing, like, let's actually go and build a sales team off the back of that and build a marketing team off the back of that. We sort of changed the wording of the early one to pre-seed. Some people might call it angel tickets instead of pre-seed. Like, there's lots of wording out there for it, but in reality it doesn't really matter either way. Like, money into the business is money into the business.
You said that you had the dev team was 4 at this point. What did the wider business look like then in terms of just rough headcounts and rough split between departments?
Yeah, so 4 founders, 4 in the dev team, of which 1 was a founder, 2 salespeople, and 1 sort of support / customer / filling in all the other gaps that happen to exist person. We didn't really have a dedicated marketing team, but all our founders came from a marketing background. So it was more of we still kind of do the marketing, the inbound, the SEO, the paid search, everything ourselves, rather than hiring someone specifically for that. But in any early stage business, like, a lot of those roles are kind of just titles. They don't really mean a lot. So, for example, we had an A who was an A and a bit of CSM and kind of an account manager and did some support and also did a little bit of product stuff and presented on a few webinars. Like, it's just part of being in that early stage business that you have to do a little bit of everything, which is great for some people and which some people absolutely hate. But I guess be aware of it if anyone's getting into an early stage business.
I mean, I love it. I like, not one day's the same. In terms of your like journey in learning, it's so much quicker. Like, working 2 years at a startup's like working 5 years at a bigger corporate business.
You learn more. You age 10 times faster as well.
100%,
you do
100%.
learn a lot more.
More receding hairlines, more wrinkles generally.
Yeah, definitely. I'm only 31 and I'm going grey on this side, which you can't see yet. But
you don't look too bad for 31. I've seen a lot worse, don't you? And that was circa 2021 by the end of that point.
Yeah,
maths.
So because midpoint of that sort of process was kind of when COVID was starting to kick off, which was actually really interesting as well in itself, because our founders from there's 2 of us here in the UK, there's 1 in Israel, 1 in the US, so like all over the place. So we were always very remote anyway as a business. We had an office and people worked in it, but it was very much come to the office if you want, work from home if you want, work from Dubai if you want, wherever. It doesn't really matter. So I think we were able to adapt really, really quick when everything started locking down, compared to some businesses that really got hit by that. I remember when we had lockdown the end of March, and then April 2020 we had our only ever negative growth month in the entire history of the business. Even to this day, we shrunk by 0.5% and we were gutted, because it's the only month that we've ever shrunk. And then the next month was like 25% month-on-month growth, because everything went crazy. Everything moved to e-commerce. Ad spend went through the roof. Like, it was just the next year and a half was absolutely nuts.
And at the point at which you, I guess, pre-seed to seed, the point at which you raised that million, what was your rough ARR at that point?
So we raised £2.1 million, $2.8 million. We were doing 400k, 500k a year, something like that. So it wasn't like huge money by any means, but it was the early signs of like, okay, there is a sustainable like business to actually invest in here. And we didn't with any C1, we didn't necessarily understand all the metrics that we had and why they worked, but we had an idea of, okay, this seems to be working, so we need some money to be able to test this. Whereas when we then get to Series A later on, it's much more about, we've proven this is working, so we need this money to actually do this. It's kind of different sort of messaging at each stage. But you had the early signs that certain things were working, and then went and raised that money for that. But revenue not huge, like $500,000, something like that a year.
Yeah, I think when you say, what was it, 2.1 GBP?
2.1,
yeah, which is what, circa 5 times revenue, which is sort of
Yeah.
ballpark where it was sort of realistic. I guess what was that's when I guess it really ramped up in terms of, like you said, the COVID impacted that with just the way the world was going then. So what was that money used for predominantly then over the next 12 to 18 months?
So first hire that we made at the time actually was I say built a team as one person, built an internal talent function for recruitment because we knew that we were going to be hiring like quite a lot of salespeople, quite a lot of product people, engineers. And that saved us a fortune in agency fees because recruitment agencies charge an arm and a leg and deliver pretty much nothing most of the time from my experience. So, I mean, some of them are great actually, that's a lie. Like there's two we've worked with who are absolutely fantastic. So yeah, maybe I shouldn't be so unfair. But a lot of them out there are, a bit, the industry, you know what I mean?
Yeah, there's a bad rep
Yeah.
for that industry in general. So I wouldn't say your words are out of place at all.
Yeah, fair. But yeah, that was one of the first houses we built, and then we built out a bit more in the dev team. We ended up bringing in about a year after we raised, we brought in our first like dedicated product person. So product was quite founder led before then. And then building out sales and customer success functions. So we neglected customer success until too late, to be honest. We should have brought someone in a bit sooner on that. And our CS lead that we have now, Dan, he's like absolutely phenomenal. And his sort of mantra is like, if you turn off new business, the business's revenue should still grow. That's how you have a successful customer success team. And that was like music to our ears. Like, okay, we really need to invest in this. And when you start looking at later rounds like Series A, Series B, and so on, things like net revenue retention are one of the core metrics that any investor will look at. So actually getting that in place helps for future rounds as well. The team is, I think, about a year after raising the money, we'd gone from about 12 to 27, 28, something like that. So we increased in size quite a bit. When you look back that it was only a year ago that you were much smaller and you could all fit in one room, it's quite a sobering journey sometimes to look back at. But yeah, it's good fun still.
And what of those 28-ish people, what was that in terms of like department split? Did you have marketing at that point, or was it just sales, CS, and product and things?
Yeah, so we had marketing. We had 4 or 5 in marketing, but we were quite heavily inbound as a business at that point. So it was a large marketing team for the size of the business, but considering the revenue split, it was pretty fair. We had 4 account execs at that point. We had 2 or 3 CSMs, VP of CS, marketing leader, about 7, 8 engineers, something like that. And then we actually replaced, so our founding CTO, they got replaced by a new CTO that came in. So sometimes people just can't scale to the next level in a business, and that's just the way it is, being like brutally honest with some people. So yeah, that was a decision that we took that was not easy, but I think anyone that founds a business with co-founders is going to find at some point there's a decision where it's not going to work out and they have to take that step moving forward. It's probably the most common thing that happens. But yeah, that was a rough split. I can't remember exactly numbers on everything, but yeah, around that sort of split.
Yeah, it's 7 or 8 engineers, so pretty much a third of the business was invested into product, which seems from what we've seen, that's where you ideally want to be. A lot of companies aren't, unfortunately. They're very heavily led on sales, maybe investment in sales rather than product.
And we've kind of maintained that between 30 and 40% is product and engineering. Like even today, like it's a similar sort of makeup for us. So yeah, it's around those sort of numbers is kind of what works best for us.
And then you sort of alluded to the fact that you initially doubled down on one area of the product. I guess once you had that investment, there's just over 2 million. What happens to the product then? What journey did the product go on?
Yeah, so we'd really doubled down on that click fraud within Google Ads specifically, but we always knew there was huge expansion potential there because anyone who runs on Google, 9 times out of 10, they're running on other channels as well, like Meta and Twitter or X or whatever it's called now, all these different channels. So we started to develop what we call a multi-channel solution. That was always part of the seed funding, was that we're going to take this money and start developing this multi-channel solution. So taking what we do on Google and rolling that across all the different walled garden performance marketing platforms. That took about 8 months to develop, so not 2.5 years like at the start, thankfully. And then started actually selling that into the existing customer base, getting some good expansion revenue from that, and then also being able to use that as like a sales hook when people are coming in looking at competitors. Well, the competitors only do this on Google. Why would you only want to protect Google? You run across 5 channels. You want to use us because we can protect you across all 5 channels. It's quite interesting that since we did that, all the others in the space have started trying to add other platforms in as well. Some have added them successfully, some very much not successfully at all. So yeah, I guess it's nice to think that we're kind of leading the space in that way a little bit.
And what were your? I think you said that it was heavily inbound at one time. What were the sort of? Was it still the strategy sort of go to market was primarily inbound at that point, or was there more of a consideration or investment into traditional outbound?
Yeah, so still predominantly inbound. So our A's that we had were like full cycle A's, they were doing their own prospecting. There's no SDR team or anything like that. We did towards the end of the seed stage, so like a couple of months before Series A, we did hire an MDR to sit within marketing, but they were to basically follow up warm inbound leads that the A's hadn't got hold of, or do nurturing campaigns and that sort of stuff. So they weren't pure outbound or anything like that. We didn't really build a proper outbound function until after the Series A, which I think is quite backwards to how most startups usually do it. They usually start outbound and then add inbound later on. But just because of our background in the marketing space, the fact we sell to marketers, and marketers hate nothing more than being sold to. So by being able to market to them instead in sort of their terms and messaging that they like and so on, that worked quite well for us. So predominantly still like 80% inbound, 10% sort of partner led at that point, and 10%.
I mean, it's a champagne problem to have, right? Because a lot of businesses would strive to have that level of inbound activity to keep their growth going, basically.
Yeah, and we had like every investment conversation we had at the seed stage and at the Series A stage. And you tell them your revenue and pipeline and all this, and then they say, what's the breakdown? You show them the inbound breakdown. Every single time investors were like, oh, okay, that's really interesting. We don't normally see that because normally it is, predominantly outbound. And it's good because those inbound leads, they have higher close rates, they're more interested, they're warmer, they're more engaged. It's the absolute sort of golden scenario to have. So worked very well.
And I was on the episode I spoke about at the start with Arthur from Chili Piper that I recorded yesterday, actually. But we were talking about that MDR role. So can you just give us a very quick breakdown of like where that basically the job function, that MDR function?
Yeah. So I mean, some people will, you get different answers depending on who you ask. Yeah, so some people will say an MDR would actually be an SDR and sit in sales. Some people would say it is an SDR, but it reports to marketing. Some would say it does ABM. Some would say it does general like lead nurturing and so on. So for us, it was not doing any cold outbound whatsoever. It would only follow accounts that had showed high level of intent. So by high level of intent, I don't mean like they came to our website and popped up in Clearbit as a visitor or so. Like, no, that's not high level of intent. They'd actually downloaded a white paper, they'd attended a webinar, they'd submitted a demo request and then gone cold and we couldn't get back to them, those kind of things. So that was the kind of activity that MDR was following up. But that's that directly within marketing, actually within the demand generation team itself. And it was fairly successful, but doesn't scale very well within that without putting huge amounts of money into sort of paid media and demand gen, which we just didn't have at the time. So that's when we ended up building the outbound function. We moved that to like a full SDR role rather than an MDR role. But hopefully that explains how we saw it, at least. But I think it is different for everyone.
Yeah, no, because I think the only other company I've seen sort of publicly speak about it is Cognizant. They have MDRs that sit in between an SDR and an AE, and it's actually a promotion up from an SDR prior to the full cycle sort of to the AE position. Okay, so we're at the point of between seed and Series A then, and then what was the Series A would have been circa 18 months ago, am I right?
It was a year ago next week, so it was 51 weeks ago.
Oh, okay. And what was that Series A?
So it's $15 million, so 15 million.
And was that with the same investors as previous, or did you have new ones come on board?
So we had our existing investors followed on to like the full amount that they're allowed to, but we had a new lead on that. Yeah, so we worked with a fund called Smedvig Capital, who very good, very, very happy with them, which is rare for investors. Like normally investors are a nightmare to deal with, but they're actually genuinely genuinely helpful, and probably one of the only investors I've ever met who say they add value to a business and genuinely do actually add value to a business. So fortunate in that sense working with them. But yeah, new investor came on there. They were the lead. They put the majority of that ticket in.
And you were talking about, I think on the kickoff call, about the current state of play in terms of the investment market scene, I guess, in like the UK or US. And like you said, you're very happy. You've been very fortunate with the investors that you've had, but I think you gave an insight as to what the pool of investors and VCs like. Do you want to just go into that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, how many investors listen to your podcast is probably the first question. Before I say too much.
Based on their ages, I wouldn't say very many unless they're using daddy's money. But
okay, fair. I did a talk on this in London. So I'm part of an angel syndicate myself, and invited to do a talk in London to them, and it was. I assumed it was going to be mostly founders, and it turned out it was like 50% founders, 50% VCs. So I was on stage unexpectedly, just completely shit talking VCs for like 30 minutes in front of them. So that was a lot of fun. But no, I guess I have quite strong kind of conviction and views on that. Like the UK and by extension, I'd say the European as well, investment market is just fundamentally broken for tech startups. Like the way that they look at investments is so wrong compared to the US. So in the US, you'll generally find most funds are ex-operators. So it's people who've built startups, scaled startups. They know how to do it. They raised a ton of money. They've had all the challenges you've had, or they have teams who've had the challenges you've had, and they can help you through that. And they want to build big businesses, and that's how they make their money, right? They put in $50 million at a 20x revenue valuation, and they want you to sell for $2 billion one day, and everyone's very happy, and you have a huge outcome. You're also more likely to fail, but when you do succeed, you succeed to a huge degree. In the UK, it's very different. So most investors, especially like earlier stage ones, they make sure that they make their money through fees and management rather than actually building big businesses, which is completely counterintuitive because they're taking money out of businesses at the point where the businesses need that money to scale in order to just cover off their own fees. So let's say that we put $1 million into this business, we'll hold it for 5 years. Over 5 years, we'll end up getting 300,000 back in fees because we charge 10% success fee, and then we charge board fees and all this sort of stuff. And we're comfortable with that because that guarantees at least that amount comes back. It's SEIS money, so we get 40% or whatever it is back in tax relief if it fails. So we're pretty much covered at that point. And if we happen to build a big business, oh well, great, everyone's very happy, but at least we've got our money. And they're all very finance focused. They come from like banking backgrounds, consulting backgrounds, that kind of stuff. They're not ex-operators, and they're not genuinely interested in building big successful businesses. So it's just a completely broken model where it's very self-serving at the detriment of the startups that they're investing in. I think it shows in the kind of businesses we build. Like in the UK, it's rare for us to build a really big successful startup. What usually happens is someone starts to get some sort of traction, and either they get acquired by a US company, or they decide there's no way I'm going to go public in the UK because my valuation is going to be slashed by 90% within 12 months of IPO anyway. They move to the US, and then they end up listing on the US markets or the NASDAQ or whatever. So yeah, I think it's a serious problem that if we actually want to have tech innovation in the UK, we need to just completely rework the entire investment scene because it's broken from top to bottom.
And I think that's in terms of having to think about that sort of consideration, but I think that's an extremely honest and useful review, if you like, of the market. Out of the question, can you decide whether you just, like, as a UK business owner, can you just go, I want an investor from the US?
Yeah. I mean, there's, depending on what the setup is, there's things like something called a Delaware flip. You sometimes have to do where you create a new entity in Delaware because it's like
what is it with Delaware, and like, is it the tax stuff?
Yeah, so it's, as far as we've not done it, but as far as I'm aware, it's very tax efficient and it's very business friendly. So it's all like business first laws and in terms of like hiring people and all that kind of stuff, and kind of at the detriment of the worker, which kind of goes a little bit against how we do things. So that's one of the reasons we've not really explored it.
This figure might be wrong, but I'm sure I read something that it's like 90% of businesses in the US are registered at Delaware or something ridiculous like that.
That would make sense, yeah. And it's dead easy to do. You basically create like an entity in the US that owns the UK entity, and then you transfer the shares to that, and then the US investor would invest in the US entity rather than the UK
Right.
entity. So it's perfectly doable. The bigger you become as a business, the harder it becomes to do that flip. But the more likely a US investor is to then invest directly into a UK business because there's not as much risk there anyway. But yeah, you can easily say we want to go to the US or elsewhere. If you want to go to Israel or Singapore or these kind of tech hubs to raise money, that's also perfectly doable. Doesn't necessarily always align with UK investors' interests. So if you have UK investors on the cap table, they might be a bit, well, we don't want to do that because suddenly we're not the most important seat at the table. We might not be getting our management fees that we wanted, and so they can be a bit apprehensive sometimes around that. But yeah, if you want to build a genuinely big business, or you want to be acquired by a US company, but for a big sum and a big acquisition, then more often than not, you need some sort of US investor on the cap table.
Interesting. You kind of shared a little bit of insight. Obviously, the new offices happened in the last sort of 12 months post that Series A. Give us a rundown. What's happened in the past year then? Obviously, it's going to have been a big year following that Series A, but what's the last 12 months look like?
Crazy. Crazy like the rest of it, to be honest. But no, it's been absolutely mad. Like, we were in a nice office, but it was like 1,000 square feet or something in Chorley, which is kind of a little market town near Preston in sort of northwest England. And you cannot, as nice as it was, you cannot scale a growing technology company in a northwest market town. Like, it just does. No one wants to work there, right? People want to work in the city centres. It's just not feasible at all. So yeah, we took the space in central Manchester, end of March, start of April, something like that. It's like 5.5 times or so the size of what we had previously. So yeah, it feels absolutely huge. Grew the team to 65, 66 people, something like that. I lose count of exactly what it is that we're on. So yeah, significant growth, mostly in sales. So we really did double down on building like that outbound motion. Got SDRs now, got head of outbound. But VP of sales has come in, grown the AE team and so on. I think actually you might have had one or two of our AEs on the podcast before.
Yeah. Sophie is. I think Sophie is still in the top 3 best performing episodes to date. So
her LinkedIn game
for
is
Sophie.
on point. Like, she's probably promoting it everywhere there. So yeah, it's good to hear. But yeah, it's been crazy in that sense. Like, growth has just been like, I read a stat the other day. It said the average for a MarTech business at Series A or post Series A in the last 12 months is 0% growth. Like, that's the average across the whole industry. Many are shrinking. We're growing at, I think, the fastest rate in percentage terms that we have since pre-seed. Obviously, pre-seed revenue is much smaller, so the percentage terms become much bigger.
Is that a result of shrinkage post-COVID?
I think it's a mixture of things. I think people went crazy during COVID, and then they started to cut back on marketing activity. But then for every sector that cuts back, there's one that increases as well. So we've seen a bit of a cutback in retail recently, especially with like cost of living crisis and people buying less goods and so on. But then we've seen a significant increase in gaming and gambling, which is generally the way it goes. Like, economic times get hard, gambling companies make a ton of money, not necessarily ethically, and then times get good again and people go and buy clothes instead of gambling on football or whatever, and retail goes back up again. So it's very cyclical in that sense. But yeah, it's been crazy 12 months. Product is now in a place where it's evolving at a pace that we've just never seen before, which is great for us, great for our customers as well, giving I guess more value than we've ever given there, and really moved ourselves up market as well in the last 12 months or so. So like, we used to be doing contracts that, like I mentioned before, we closed that annual deal. It was like 2,500, and that was a huge deal for us. Our average now is like in excess of 10 times that, and increasing quarter on quarter. So moving very much away from that kind of SMB lower end of the market. Like, that's not really the where we give good value. It's not the product we're building and so on. And you can't sustain a full outbound motion if you're only charging $2,000 a year to someone. Like, it's just not feasible at all. So yeah, it's been crazy, been good fun, been very stressful for everybody involved, I think. But we've done a really good job at building a really good team that all like that kind of startup and scale up life, and the fact that even at this stage you are doing a little bit of everything. If you're an AE, you're not just selling all day every day. You're still being asked to jump on product review calls or to jump on customer success calls or contribute to product development. Like, there's just always that kind of stuff going on. So yeah, it's been good. It's been good fun.
Now, in terms of those product developments, then you obviously, in terms of you've got the best product package you've ever had. What have been some of the highlights in the past year in terms of that product's growth?
I think definitely doubling down on that multi-channel sort of protection side that I mentioned. So we protect across, I think it's 15, 16 platforms now. So rather than just Google or just Google and Meta and Bing, we've got a huge range of platforms. Even like Naver in Korea, that we have clients using that. Yahoo Japan, we have like platforms that we never normally come across in the UK. So that's been pretty cool. And then we did a huge upgrade on our actual like protection methods. So I guess not to get too technical. So Google, for example, launched a campaign type called Performance Max, which they're migrating a lot of their customers to, especially retail customers. So we're the first and only solution, actually, as far as I'm aware, that launched full support for invalid traffic prevention on Performance Max. Nobody else can do it. No one else has kind of figured it out yet, I suppose. So that's been really, really powerful for us and a real growth driver as well. So yeah, that coupled with also like audience exclusion. So we used to be a more network IP based solution. Now we're kind of a dual layer network and IP plus audience and cohorts on top, which is making it a lot more effective for users. So yeah, real rapid sort of development now that we have, I guess, the resources to really invest into that, and a really, really solid product and engineering team as well.
Given that this is a sales podcast, then what from in terms of like your outbound sales motion, what out of curiosity again, what is the I guess like key strategic objective or triggering opportunity that your team go after in terms of they know X business will require your sort of solution? What do they hunt?
It's a really good question. So the team actually have target account lists like across the business. We have X thousand accounts that like these fit our persona pretty much perfectly. So this is who we're going to go after. Reason for approaching it that way. So we always say it's a bit of a blessing and a curse that our solution can be used in theory by anyone that advertises online, which is a crazy number of businesses. I mean, it's pretty much every business these days. But if you go after everything, you'll get nothing. Like, you just have to be focused on what you do. So we have target account lists that are businesses that fit our ICP, that have estimated ad spend around sort of the regions that we would want to work in, company sizes around what we work best with, and so on. And then we approach it from that way. Not necessarily a specific trigger. Like I'm not so much of a believer in this kind of like, oh, this company had a funding announcement, make sure you reach out to them, because well, everyone else is doing that, right? Like we got it, we raised $15 million. It sounds like a lot. It doesn't actually go as far as some people might think. And suddenly 2 days later after the press release, you've got 500 cold emails in your inbox trying to sell you, everything under the sun. So we don't really approach it from that sort of way. It's very much like a value add first, no hard sales. Like, the sales team are acutely aware of that. I despise hard sales. Anyone doing that gets in a lot of trouble. It's not how we do things. It's all about giving lots of value. People will naturally start to come through word of mouth, come inbound to us, and those that we go outbound to by giving value, you build a much, much better relationship that way. So talking to them about how they can improve their efficiency, or if there's any sort of scandals that come recently, there's been somewhere on YouTube and inefficiencies on YouTube, giving them exclusion lists they can apply to their campaigns, totally ungated, free of charge, like just giving value. And then so taking it from there once they have that kind of trust in us, because ultimately we say, it sounds a bit cheesy, but we say we are in the business of selling trust. So we're showing people what is real and what isn't real in terms of the media spend, but they have to trust us. We can show them why we've made certain decisions, but they still have to trust that we have their interests at heart to make those decisions and to make those exclusions. So making sure we build that really high level of trust with people before any sort of commercial or sales kind of conversations happen.
Yeah, I said this in the last episode, but I was speaking to Jen at Lavender, and they spoke about becoming experts in the problem and actually, as a trusted advisor, positioning yourself to come up with free solutions to a problem before you actually pitch your product, which is kind of what you were saying there. Like you give away free things and you coach them through other alternatives. And then at the point at which they're saying, great, we've tried that, or we just don't have the resources, or we're looking for something a bit more professional, let's say, then you're perfectly placed to say, well, that's what we can help you out with. And you were heavily inbound anyway, so I guess you don't necessarily, like you said, you don't have to do the hard sales, which is always nice, especially like you said, selling to marketers. I'm a marketer. I'm probably one of the worst people to target with an email or a phone call, or especially a LinkedIn message. I was away for 2 days, tail end of last week, and I think I had 9 messages in my LinkedIn inbox off the back of connections and things like that. And it was just archive. Yeah, marketers are tough to sell to. Okay, we've done like a 5-part whistle stop tour of the business over the I guess the last like 6 years, I think you said. Now, in terms of just to finish off with a little bit of advice and top tips, then, like for you, you probably get asked this question quite a lot, but like, what would be 3 of the biggest learnings or biggest sort of tips that you would give to someone else, either in the midst of that, founding stage, or someone thinking about doing it?
I'd say don't do it unless you really thrive off stress. So some people are built to really enjoy the stress of it, and that's kind of what drives them. And you will burn out fast. Like, people do this 1, 2, or 3 times, but it's over a maximum kind of 15-year time horizon. And after that, you're just done. Like, you just cannot handle anymore. So yeah, if you don't thrive off stress, don't do it. It's probably the best answer to that one. I also say, kind of touched on it, I guess, a bit earlier, but like, don't assume if you found a business you have to go and raise money. Like, many businesses out there are very successfully bootstrapped, and actually the outcome of a bootstrap business can be better personally than a venture-backed one. You could raise $100 million in venture capital. Well, when you sell your business, you have to repay that $100 million to your investors before the rest of the proceeds get split between everyone. So actually, you might not be getting as much as you think from a $200-300 million sale. You might get just as much personally from a $10 million or a $15 million sale if you own the whole thing. But then if you do raise money, always raise more money than you think you're going to need. Like, that's something that someone said to me early on, and we've done it at every round. We budgeted, like, seed round, we budgeted 1.4 million of spend, but we raised 2.1. The reason we raised 2.1 is so that we have that buffer in there, and it means that if things don't go to plan or the market dives off a cliff, which it did before we went to Series A, then you just have that sort of bit of extra buffer. So yeah, never hurts to raise a little bit of extra money, I suppose.
And then this, you as an individual, single most valuable thing you've learned?
Good question. I'd say, I was talking with our product leader actually about this the other day. Just because a competitor does something, it doesn't mean it's the right thing, and it doesn't mean it's what you should do as a business.
Grass is greener.
Yeah, and it's something that any salesperson will be like, but I lose deals for this reason, and the competitor does it. Maybe the competitor is just a better fit for them. Like, we don't want to change who we're going after and change our whole ICP and change our whole product positioning just to accommodate features a competitor has. And when we look back at our main competition and we think in the early days, it's like, we need to do this like them, we need to do that like them. And actually, looking at it now, we believe their approach is fundamentally wrong in many cases. And a lot of prospects that come to us also say, oh yeah, we're talking to you because we don't like their approach, or we thought that was the wrong way of doing it. It didn't quite make sense to us. So it's kind of being validated now. But yeah, don't do something just because a competitor does it. It can be very distracting and actually use a lot of resources that could be used to make yourself sort of a more unique, better proposition.
Yeah, like you were saying, at the end of the day, if you're experts in the problem and you believe that you are the best solution to that problem, why would you deviate from that vision statement or mission statement, whatever you want to call it? You, like you said a couple of times, to double down on what is clearly what you've got positive signals on, what's working, rather than trying to invest in 10 other things that you think. Yeah, that's a really interesting one. More close to home, probably. But yeah, very, very interesting. Final question. 4 minutes left. Final question. Podcast and nominate. Who do I need to get on the podcast next, and why?
I don't know if you've had. I don't think you've had them. So there's a guy called Hector Forward. He used to be at Cognizant. He's one of the early salespeople at Cognizant. He's had a tech startup since then. I think he's working on something new now. Expert in everything sales, and I'd say when it comes to like bouncing ideas off him around sales and go-to-market, a little bit of a mentor as well for me. So yeah, I think very, very highly of him. Would think he'd be really, really interesting for your guests to listen to, and he'd definitely be up for it as well, because every time I've suggested something before, he's like, yeah, sure, I'll do it. So hopefully it'll be an easy one for you.
Perfect. Well, if you're happy to, we'll do a little quick group chat on LinkedIn and just introduce me, and we'll get him on. That sounds perfect. Right. Well, thank you for jumping on and sharing a bit of bit of a deep dive on Lunio. Very, very interesting from my perspective, at least. And I hope those listening or watching found it useful. Obviously, if you're listening, please follow. If you're watching, please subscribe, hit the like button, and we will catch you in the next episode. And big thanks to Neil for joining us.
Thanks for having me.